Hi, everybody. My name is Roger Canaff. I just appeared on Smarter Online Safety with Jocelyn King. I am a legal expert when it comes to violence against women and children, and particularly sexual exploitation against children. And thankfully, Jocelyn and I were able to discuss all sorts of aspects about this, particularly prevention, the way predatory behavior often works, and what parents and kids can do to keep themselves as safe as possible in just an ever-changing and an increasingly complex world.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Smarter Online Safety Podcast. I am your host, Jocelyn King, the Queen of Online Safety, and we have an exciting guest for you today. Roger Canaff is a former New York City special victims prosecutor and a renowned expert on sexual violence and trauma. He's a past president of End Violence Against Women International and a charter member of Counterquo. He brings decades of experience as a prosecutor and an advocate for survivors. He's appeared as a cybercrime expert on CNN and numerous other networks, offering his expertise on headline making cases. And as if that weren't enough, he is also, fascinatingly, an award winning legal thriller author. His writing is influenced by his experiences as a child protection and anti violence against women advocate, a legal expert, and a speaker. And he's devoted his legal career to the eradication of violence against women and children, and his writing career to those same topics. So, Roger, so great to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jocelyn. Really appreciate it.
That's great. I loved our chats about your background, and I know
Hmm.
our listeners are going to be really excited to learn more about you and what you have to share. So I just want to, kick it off. You've literally spent decades, prosecuting and advocating in some of the most difficult areas of sexual violence and trauma. And, what first drew you to this work? And I'd love to know, what has kept you going.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse myself. I never want to make anything a whole lot about me because that's really not the point.
Mm,
And honestly, I don't think that that circumstance had a lot to do with me going into this work. Now, I'm sure there are an army of psychologists that would probably disagree with me and say, look, even if you don't know it, and that's
mm,
possible. But
mhm,
really, I just, my father was DEA all of his professional life. So I came from a bit of a law enforcement background. By the
mm,
time I was interested in law school, I knew that I wanted to do this kind of work. I
mhm.
felt confident about working with women and children. I certainly didn't revisit my own victimization. You have to process all that stuff before you can be effective anyway.
Right.
Honestly, that wasn't really a thing, but just to be fair, that's what's out there,
Right.
and it's what's true. So it just seemed like a good fit for me, and it was. And I think the interesting thing was that in the mid to late 90s, when I got started in
Mhm.
prosecution, there were very few men that wanted to do special victims work or that even were given the opportunity.
Right.
So
Why do you
that
think that was,
made
just
me,
out of curiosity?
oh, I can tell you, it's a little bit of toxic masculinity and just sort of a tradition in American prosecution,
Mhm,
kind of a cowboy mentality, almost a paramilitary thing.
mhm,
It's just, unfortunately, just a part of, and not just that, it was just gender stereotypes in general. For in American prosecution for so long, and still to this day, if there's a child abuse case or a violence against women case,
mhm.
oftentimes in these offices, which are not nearly as much now, but which traditionally male dominated, the idea was, okay, we'll find a woman. Find a
Okay.
woman in the office who can handle this case because she'll be able to talk to children. She's naturally more nurturing, and that'll just be the best. And oftentimes that was right. I mean,
Mhm,
oftentimes it was appropriate, but that's not the point. I mean, obviously, an individual should not be given or forced into, a prosecutor shouldn't be assigned a sexual abuse or a child sexual abuse case unless they are prepared for it and they want to do it. And
right.
not all women do, just like not all men do. So there
Right.
weren't many men wanting to do it,
Mhm,
and because of that, I was really lucky. I got invited into the training circuit pretty early. There were wonderful women, almost all women, in the anti-violence community who drew me in and wanted me to be a part of the movement because I was a male and there weren't that many of us. So that really benefited me tremendously in terms of getting my career going and then moving into consulting and training.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that with us because that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy work. I haven't done nearly, what you've done, but I've been on the dark web and I've seen a lot of
Mm,
child porn things created, some actual, and some AI created and all of that. And it's hard because you can't unsee it. And as somebody who
no.
cares about children and stuff, you need to do it, but it can also it can be very stomach turning as well. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of things that you've seen and had to deal with. What would you characterize as, something you could share with us that was a case you were involved in that had a more positive outcome than not, and or some kind of justice?
Well, I mean, there were several. Here's the thing. Uh, when I was actively doing these cases, when I was in court on a daily basis, we're talking 12, 15 years ago now,
Hmm.
we didn't have the technology that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, things have
In
changed.
the, yes, they have changed and they have changed rapidly. And
Hmm.
for that reason, when it comes to nuts and bolts training with prosecutors, I don't do that kind of training, the technological type of training, because frankly, younger and more excuse me, tech savvy people
Right.
need to be doing that kind of
Mhm.
training. Now, I understand the dynamics, of course, and I understand the technology in the larger sense. I, I the cases were never joyful, but absolutely, I had very, very positive experiences. I think the most positive thing about any child sexual abuse case was understanding that the survivor in that case, the legal term is victim, when I realized that the child victim that I was working with and her family, when she felt empowered, when she felt as if somebody important had believed her, that was the victory.
Yeah.
Sometimes we won, quote unquote, in court. Sometimes we achieved a conviction. A lot of times we didn't. But as long as I felt the survivor in the case was fairly treated, as long as I felt that her healing had been
Mhm.
advanced because of the legal exercises that I was doing, then I felt great about the case. And I can tell you, I had tremendous success. And if I say so myself,
Mhm.
I think I was very, very good at framing the issue. Look, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it together. And if there's justice to be done, then of course we would like to see a criminal conviction. But that conviction, that hammer of the law, that sort of Judeo Christian right and wrong thing
Mhm.
that we seek to address, where how we seek to address wrongs in this society is
Mhm.
very blunt and it's very narrow. Healing
Right.
and recovery is by far the more important thing. So to
Right.
the extent that I was a part of that, I am much, much happier than with any win-loss ratio.
Oh, well said. Well said. And thank you for that. There's so much. We want to get into some of the things that are happening with the technology changes. But before we get into that, whether they're using, a new Nudify app or something from 20 years ago or whatever, I'm sure the warning signs for parents haven't changed all that much. What are the, top warning signs that parents should watch for that their child might be experiencing some kind of online sexual exploitation or sextortion of some kind? And what steps should they be taking?
That's a great question. I always stress, and I think many parents now in the modern world, to the extent that they can, are much better. Some really, really good things have happened. For one thing, as a society, we're just so much more open to discussing this. Years ago it was stranger danger and how to talk to your kids
Right.
about potential sexual assault. Then we realized that yeah, strangers are dangerous, but wow, kids have far, far, far more to be afraid of from individuals they know or people who gain entry into their lives and begin to groom them. So all
Right.
of these trends are good in terms of how parents are armed to assist their children. I think maintaining and demanding an open relationship with your child in terms of their online activity until a certain age is absolutely key. And kids are different, but I absolutely believe that children who are beginning to use the internet, around the age of sometimes 9,
Mhm.
sometimes even a little younger, I think
Mhm.
all the way through high school, their parents really need to have an open door policy with them. I need to know what it is that you're seeing. There are things out there that you may not perceive, and of course, by the time you get into adolescence, I mean, it's every kid's job to outsmart their parents, right?
Right.
It's what
Yes.
16-year-olds do. I mean,
Uh-huh.
of course I want privacy. Of course I don't want my mom to know everything that I'm doing, and kids are great at that.
Right.
But I think maintaining that, listen, I need your passwords. I need to know what it is that you're doing for your safety. I think that is key. And just, from toddlerhood on, just
Mhm.
creating a space where your child feels comfortable coming to you and saying, Mom, something's happening to me, and I am not comfortable with it. It may not be anything, but I want you to know about it. That is so crucial,
Right.
because the second that, most predatory people, no matter what the technology is, whether it's hands-on predation in a schoolyard, or it's sending still pornographic photos, or it's doing what we're doing now, which is creating generative AI and prompts and stuff. Whatever the predatory behavior and strategy is, for most predatory people, they follow the classic rules of nature. They follow the path of least resistance and greatest security. If they are inconvenienced as a predator in any way, chances are they're going to move on. If they believe that they're being detected, they're going to move on. So that early intervention, I think, is really what's key for parents if their child is about to be, or is slowly being drawn into this kind of activity.
That's a really good point because and we want to be able to trust people and teach our kids to trust people, not to turn them into being paranoid of everything. But I saw a recent statistic that says, out this is a global number, but that there are 500,000, 500,000 online predators online on a daily basis. And those are the knowns. So if you assume, so I mean, there's 8 billion people on the planet, but 500,000, and you don't want your child to interact with them. And of course, they don't look like online predators. They look like teenage, friends or the
Mm-hmm.
potential girlfriend or boyfriend that the child in your life, wants to know. So let's talk a little bit about that because you've seen how predators operate online. And what specific like grooming tactics are you seeing? I mean, especially, so many parents are looking at Discord and Snapchat and gaming sites.
Yeah.
What do parents and just adults who have children in their lives or young people in their lives what do they need to know to help protect them?
Sure. Well, I mean, just understanding the dynamics of adolescence, I think, are important, and I think a lot of people intuitively do. We were all teenagers at one time before
Right.
we became parents.
Yes.
In the great majority of cases I see where a predatory person targets an adolescent, it's almost always begins, through some sort of a friendship. The grooming process begins, like as you mentioned, gaming consoles. That's a very, very, very common way of getting in, just getting to know the child. There won't be any sexual discussion for, some of these predators are extremely patient.
Yeah.
All we're talking about is the game. All we're talking about are the things that you're into. All we're talking about is K-pop, or all we're talking about is Grand Theft Auto, or whatever the platform is. And then slowly, a lot of times, what predators will do, particularly with adolescents, is they'll seek to begin. Sometimes in the business, we call it kind of a lover grooming process. So the predator either pretends to be somebody younger,
Mm-hmm.
meaning a peer around that child's age, but
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes they will make themselves perhaps slightly younger, because basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to convince the adolescent the that she, let's just to use a
Sure.
pronoun for convenience, that
Mm-hmm.
she is, really older than she seems, and that she's really ready for the adult world. And
Mm-hmm.
so he or she may say, as a predator, may say, listen, I know you're only 15, but to me you seem like you're 25. To me you seem like you're my age. Nobody understands me but you. I was in Wichita last week. I spoke at their gala in the evening, and one of the stories that their child advocacy center, this is in Sedgwick County, Texas, one of the stories that they sort of focused on, without naming names of course, was a traveler case that they worked on and with their ICAC team, Internet Crimes Against Children, and they
Mhm.
laid out the strategy that that predator had used, and he was successfully able to lure a young woman from her home state, a few states away, over to Kansas. And the
Mhm.
way the predator did that was to very, very slowly and carefully establish this lover type relationship. I need
Mhm.
you need me. It's you and me against the world. You're the only one who understands me. You get the point. That's most of the time that's what's done.
Mhm. And then they're also planting, aren't they also planting that, well, you can't tell, your parents stuff about it. They'll try to break us up.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And so they're
absolutely.
they're
It's
already seeding those defenses into them so that when you as a parent or an uncle or
yeah.
a godparent or a neighbor is trying to help, they're seeing it as, oh yeah, he or she warned me about this. And so
Oh
you're
yeah, absolutely. It's
kind of
like,
like
look,
an
you're
early Stockholm syndrome sort of thing.
right. You're ready for adulthood, and the people
Mhm.
around you don't think you are. It's
Right.
not their fault. I know mom and dad love you, but they don't understand you the way I do.
Mhm.
And yeah, and this is secrecy.
Mhm.
Enforcing with the child that the secret is paramount. That happens in grooming across the lifespan.
Right.
Toddlers are told they have to keep the secret. Children are told they have to, and onward. And for some kids, that's the first emotional burden
Mhm.
that they and that begins to be a part of the pathology that kids suffer when they begin to experience sexual abuse. But without a doubt, when it comes to adolescence and predation that occurs through the internet, it's usually exactly what we're talking about. It's almost always that lover type grooming thing. And yes, the listen, you're going to get pushed back. This is what you need to do, and they'll assist. They'll assist. Most adolescents, depending on where they are and who their peers are, most of
Mhm.
them are aware of some of the tricks anyway to get around safety features and to hide their information. Again, it's not
Right.
any different than kids have been doing forever. It's just that
Right.
their tools are different.
What do you think of parents sharing some of these types of cases and stuff with especially with teenagers? Younger kids, maybe not as much, but
Mm-hmm.
that's up to individual parents. And it depend, there's four distinct age groups in kids, right? Before
Mm-hmm.
18. But what do you think of sharing those so that they're aware of them? I mean, when I was a teenager, I was certain that everything that applied to other people did not apply to me, and so did all of my friends. We were special. You're special when you're a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
they'd be taken in by it, but that would never happen to me. You just kind of have this impervious feeling, um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's very normal. But it seems like there's a way for parents to be able to have conversations and just explain things and say, so just, I really want you to be looking out for anybody who's befriending you, who's kind of do a preemptive strike on telling
Yes.
them what to expect. So
Mm-hmm.
just the way the predators do by
Yep.
seeding the information that would turn them against you. You want to
Mm-hmm.
see the information that would make them get all of a sudden get suspicious of somebody they've been talking to for 90 days and then go, wait, why are they?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the earlier you start
Mm-hmm.
with your child, I think that the more successful you're going to be. There's going to be rebellion. There's
Mm-hmm.
going to be, no matter how healthy a relationship is between a parent and child, obviously there's going to be bumps and bruises. That's the nature of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think with early preparation and with the parents uh, making their children understand that there are these negative forces out there, I do think that can be very effective. Because as much as a teenager might be, I don't want to say gullible, but as much as they might be open to this kind of influence, to this pernicious sort of a thing, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them are very bright, certainly far more tech savvy. Every single year they become more tech savvy, and a lot
Right.
of them are if they are properly directed and they are made to understand, they're very very willing to say this is gross, go away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's certainly not hopeless by any stretch. By
That's
any
right.
stretch, there are plenty of kids, and children are very, very good at at sort of understanding and differentiating. And again, as I said, we just as a species, we get more sophisticated every year when it
Mhm.
comes to technology. Kids now are far more savvy, I think, than they would have been even
Mhm.
15 years ago. So those things are helpful as long as the direction is there.
That's so great because we all we know the drill on teaching kids not to get in a car with a stranger,
Right.
but we don't teach them not to go into a chat room with a stranger. And there's this whole new survival skill needed in this day and time.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's become sophisticated because yeah, I'm going on a gaming console. I'm going to be, I'm playing games with a kid who's in Australia. I'm playing games with all
Yeah.
of that stuff is fine, and just the potential dangers are there. But the early intervention, the helping them understand, I think that goes a long way. And I also think, real quick, if you have an adolescent that already is in that situation and you've discovered it, yeah,
Mhm.
I certainly as a prosecutor working with the adolescent, talking to them about why I was prosecuting their case. And
Mhm.
sometimes they would be like, listen, I don't feel that way toward this person. I don't feel like I was exploited. If I spoke to them one on one, if I spoke to them in a basically adult fashion, I had a lot of success with making them understand the selfishness that was behind
Mhm.
the predatory behavior, and the general negativity of it. And after a while, they begin to get it because again, they're not you know kids aren't dumb. They say and do dumb things, but
Right.
but by and large, when it comes to tech, they're very bright, I think.
Yeah,
And I think society has moved on, and I think a lot of them are ready to say, wow, you're right.
that's great.
What a horrible thing to do.
Yeah, we're having to teach safety on online the way we teach it. And we're decades ahead, centuries ahead of
Hmm.
teaching people how to be safe in the physical world. We're not that far into this online world where we have to teach people and teach our
Right.
young people how to be safe there. That's great. Because they're great with tech, but they're they're less aware of the safety issues that older people are. So there you go.
Sure.
Yeah. What would you, so for now, the other thing too, we've got nudify apps. Probably about half the people listening know what a nudify app is, and the other half wonder what it is, and everybody needs to know what to do about it. So could you describe the current situation with what's happening with nudify? Because that's happening to adults and young people.
Sure. I mean, I'll preface by saying I'm a legal expert, not a tech expert.
Right.
I understand the tech, but of course, I know you've got people in your circle that are much, much better at that. Bottom line, generative AI and things like stable diffusion, these are technologies that allow pretty much any photograph of it could be anybody. It could be an infant, a toddler, a teenager, an adult. Any photograph can be uploaded and put inside one of these machines with stable diffusion and using prompts, text prompts, the photograph can be manipulated to become pornographic, quote unquote, nudifying, things of that nature. It's very, very frightening. And, the I think the biggest challenge right now is that it's simply just happening. So rather than looking to draw a child into contact, which is still going to happen,
Hmm.
what's being sold right now, what these tech companies and unfortunately what social media platforms are continuing, even though they're trying to stop them, or at least according to them, they're
Hmm.
still sort of making public, are these technologies that allow for the most innocent picture to be turned into either an intimate or just a downright pornographic image or video. And that's
Right.
very frightening because there's no grooming process there necessarily. It's just I'm in eighth grade. I have photographs of me all over the internet, like most young girls,
Right.
and somebody captured one of those photographs and turned it into this horrible thing. And the impact on that on the victims is
Mhm.
is utterly devastating.
And now they're contacting them for ransom. It's like, we're going to publish this to all your friends and family and everything.
Mm-hmm.
You don't pay X. And so I think some of the warning signs there you have to look for is, kids acting really anxious or upset or nervous or
Mm-hmm.
depressed, which is hard because let's face it, part of being an adolescent is having mood swings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes you got
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
look at
Going.
them not coming out of it within a short period of time, that it's not just something
Mm-hmm.
that happened at school, but that it's or with friends, but that it's sustained for a few days because
Yeah.
it can
Yeah.
really lead to, teenagers feeling suicidal.
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely. And the other problem is that the perpetrators
Hmm.
right now are often very young themselves.
Hmm.
I mean, without a doubt, there are adult predators out there that we're all disgusted with and appropriately frightened of. But many perpetrators, because the technology is so easy to use and because it is everywhere, a lot of times the perpetrators are the same age as the victims. So you have boys who are mostly boys as perpetrators, mostly girls as victims. You
Mhm.
have boys who are 12, 13, 14 who, they're sexually curious. It's understandable. And when this technology is put in front of them, they end up being the perpetrator. So it makes it even more difficult because then what do you do with the perpetrator? Well, there need to be consequences. He needs to be told that that's wrong. There
Mhm.
needs to be some repercussions for that. But at the same time, this 12, 13, 14-year-old boy is probably not necessarily, a budding predator either. He's a sexually curious person, and some social media platforms served up this
Mhm.
technology to him. And they do that in very, very titillating and very, very, very disturbing ways.
Right. Right. And you don't have your prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed till you're 28. So when you're 14,
Exactly. Yeah.
16-year-old, your ability to have empathy or think about what the implications are, and you don't have adult life experience to have that same sense of right and wrong. And like you said, they're being manipulated by the tech itself. So one thing I've worked in public relations in tech companies for a number of years, and one of the things we always had is half the things we published were press releases, for instance, about stuff. The other half were things we called drawer statements, which were just in case, like it was like the break glass stuff. If this should happen to our company, this is what we would say. And I think, I've worked with a few people recently who have gone through, women who have gone through issues with nudify apps and things being published. One of them is an elected official, and a
Yeah.
couple others are more high profile, they're executives. And so the
Hmm.
impact of that, and this is where there's a gender bias in our culture about what's okay for men and women
Hmm.
and stuff. So it really affects women executives. And there's a lot of women who are considering going into, elected official positions that are double thinking it right now because
Oh, absolutely.
and so
Women are 99% of the victims.
right.
There are, I mean, a study that was done recently focused on the U.S. Congress, and they discovered about 1 in 6 women, about 60% of women in Congress on both sides of the political spectrum, have been
Mhm.
victimized. In total numbers, I think there was exactly one male, and
Right.
all the rest of
Right.
So yeah, women are far, far, far more unfortunately susceptible to being
Right.
victimized by this technology than men. But that's not to say that men
Yeah.
couldn't be, and I think it would be just as horrifying for any male to see himself in some sort of a pornographic situation that was devised by an electronic. It's terrible for anybody that experiences it. But yes, it
Right.
happens to be that right now women are experiencing it far more than men.
And I think that one thing that all women have to do, and also, here's the thing too, good men want to protect the women in their lives, whether it's daughters, wives, girlfriends, mothers, sisters, friends.
Mm-hmm.
And gone are the days when you can just pull up your drawbridge and protect them in the castle. So
Yeah.
the thing to do is for the men listening to also be aware that this is a good conversation to have because when something like this happens, it's one thing if you actually have a nude picture that leaks, and we've seen that over the decades. But
Mm-hmm.
for all these women these aren't even real photos. We live in a time where you have to think about what would you say when and if this happens, because there's a high likelihood that it could. What do you put out that claims that this isn't even a photo of me, this is that, and so that you're putting the attention back on the crime rather than on you. And
Yeah.
it's a conversation that everyone needs to have with 50% of the population of women.
Oh yeah, at least.
Mhm.
I kind of think I personally believe that we're going to reach almost a post-privacy world.
Mm,
I think so many people are going to be victimized.
mhm,
And not only that, prior to this tech, generative AI, to my knowledge, came out around 2022. For
mhm.
years prior to that, there were compromising videos, there were compromising photographs that were shared. That was called revenge porn, right? And it's
Right,
still out there.
right.
So, there are women and some men that have been exposed that way. And thankfully, I think we're moving toward a place where people will say, you know what? So what? You were a kid. You sent a selfie to your boyfriend when you were 15 and, when you were unclothed. Who cares? I mean, and I'm sorry, that's the way it should be for
Right.
anybody that, now, of course, that's different from this predatory behavior that's, hey, we're going to, and it can be used for all sorts of things. The individuals who are uploading innocent images or
Mhm.
just typical photographs and turning them into pornographic products are doing that either for their own self gratification, or they're doing it for for a much even worse purpose, to threaten
Right.
that person, to keep them away from public life, to push them out of public life, or just to destroy their lives.
Right. That makes total sense. So we've been sharing a lot of the reality of the situation, which can be a little daunting. But based on your experience, what are the biggest mistakes that people make when they're dealing with being victimized in this way? Whether it's themselves or a loved one, who's being exploited online in some way. And what are the biggest mistakes they do, and what should they do instead?
Well, I mean, I think blaming themselves is probably the biggest mistake. I mean, I people who discover that they have been victimized in this way, I think so many of them. And by the way, this is what women have been doing, men also, but this is certainly what women have been doing for centuries. Every time they're sexually abused or exploited, they blame themselves and they ask themselves, what did I do to bring this on? Was
Mhm.
I too loose with my Facebook privacy settings?
Mhm.
Did I allow for some person to find a photograph of me and I didn't know about? Did I somehow invite this? Was I flirty with somebody? Was I acting in some inappropriate way? So I think many victims blame themselves, turn inward. And again, this reflects sexual abuse for centuries. I'm
Mhm.
not going to tell anybody. I'm going to blame myself and try to get over it and pull myself out of it. That I
Right.
think is the biggest mistake. I think if this is something that happens to you, again, this is easier said than done, but I think it's important to report it to authorities
Mhm.
and make it. And the now authorities, of course, we're talking about in the U.S. 50 different states, thousands of jurisdictions in the UK, in the EU. There are many limited ways that actual authorities can deal with this stuff. But still, creating a footprint, I think, is a good idea, and expressing that, hey, I was victimized by this. I'm a part of this. That frankly makes you a part of a larger group. Not only is there safety in numbers, but I think there's some dignity in it. Look, this is something that happened to me. I'm not going to hide in the shadows. I'm going to come forward and talk about how it happened to me. So, and again, that's easier said than done.
Right.
And I would never ever judge any victim. I don't judge victims, period, in terms of how they deal with
Mhm.
exploitation. But I applaud people who are exploited and say, I'm not going to blame myself and keep this under wraps. I'm going to let people know that this happened to me. That doesn't mean I have to proliferate the material, of course,
Right.
but I'm going to let people know that this happened to me. And I applaud. And again, there are politicians I have seen on both sides. I don't want to name them because I don't want to give any more amplification to their victimization. But they have been very dignified and very good at coming out and saying, "This happened to me. It was devastating, but I'm not. But you're not going to shut me down because of it."
Right. No, that's great advice. And then the other thing too, like, so you go through your local police or sheriff, but then there's also like the FBI's, cybercrime filing that you want to do, right? The IC3.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. There are clearinghouses now. I mean, in May, the I know in the United States the Take It Down Act was passed, and good on Ted Cruz. He was the guy that was sort of behind it. In the UK, there's a Safety Act, and part of what this legislation does is,
Mhm.
yes, it creates a clearinghouse. It allows for it allows for authorities across states to begin to sort of be up on this, to understand it, and at some point the technology can be examined, and sometimes perpetrators can be identified through it. So
Mhm.
yeah, I absolutely think there's some hope there. It's certainly not the end of the
Mhm.
it's not the total answer to the problem, but there are things that can be done.
Right. And then of course, you don't want to never pay the ransom. Never pay a ransom for this stuff because
Yeah, exactly.
even
Yeah,
even if you pay it, it's going to get published anyway, or they're going to come back for more. So you're not protecting yourself by paying the ransom, right?
correct. No, I agree absolutely. And again, I would not judge anybody's decisions,
Mhm.
and there are certainly cases that can be different, but in general, correct.
Right.
Bowing into that kind of exploitation really doesn't get you anywhere.
And a big thing, a lot of people are like, oh my God, I want to get rid of this. And so they're deleting everything rather than taking screenshots as evidence. As a prosecutor, what advice do you have for people going through it at the time, like to preserve anything that's going to help them be more victorious?
Sure. I mean, everything has to be memorialized the same way, just like with physical evidence. If you, it's the same thing as not wiping off fingerprints on your windowsill, even though it creeps
Mhm.
you out. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's unfortunate. And what I would suggest is get, get assistance for that. There are, thank God, we are at a point now in society where there are rape crisis centers, very good and decent ones all over the country. There are victim advocates, there are crisis centers, there are individuals who can assist,
Mhm.
where you can bring electronic devices to them, and they can assist you with memorializing in a way that doesn't necessarily force the victim to catalog it, download it, process it. And
Because
and
you're
and I'm
you're
not.
reliving it when you do that, and
Yeah,
so
exactly. And I'm
let
not talking
somebody
about
else
law
help you.
enforcement.
Let
Right,
somebody else help.
right. And those resources are out there, and they are. I mean, I think local rape crisis centers. I
Mhm.
follow them, the ones that I worked with individually, but across the board. And I'm very happy to say that in most cases they are keeping up with the technology. They're keeping up with the new threats. So
Mhm.
even if there isn't a law enforcement response,
Mhm.
there is still a victim advocate response. There's still a survivor response, a support. And I would absolutely encourage anybody to seek support when they're dealing with this, not to attempt to deal with it themselves.
This is so great. So thank you. So we've gotten a lot of nuggets here, right? So one is the
Mm-hmm.
prevention, which is to be aware of what's going on and talk about it before it starts happening. So you
Right.
hope
Yeah.
everybody in the family or in your friend group has awareness of it. Probably secondly, it's have a plan of what you would do should that happen to you so that you're not trying to think it up on the fly when you're in, when you're in victim mode and feeling, under fight or flight
Mm-hmm.
and trauma, right? And then the third is make sure you're getting the help, right? So get the
Yes. Absolutely. And the help will be in the form of, that initial advocacy to help you preserve evidence, and
Mhm.
then the kind of therapy and, and the more empathic response that will help you to get past it so that you can remember it without reliving it.
That is so great. And so what is a final takeaway on that topic before we start talking about your books?
Well, I think that the final takeaway is just that we need to move beyond so much this where the bad guys are always going to be a half step ahead. The technology is always going to exist and the potential for it to be abused. We need to educate girls and boys on the absurdity of this, on the perniciousness of it, just on the negative effects of it. And I know it's aspirational, but until we achieve a higher level of respect for each other, as men and women, as boys and girls, we're still going to be a long way off from bringing this to zero.
Great, great, great point. That's awesome. So let's, on a lighter note, now that we've gotten all this out, tell us about your books and the thrillers and the writing of that. Is first of all, was that kind of cathartic for you, or was it just like your
Yeah. Oh, absolutely,
childhood
absolutely,
dream to be an
absolutely.
author, or what?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the first, as I said before, I was a survivor, or I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. It was a grooming process. It was kind of fairly typical. The perpetrator was older than me, but not significantly.
Mhm.
But so the very first book I wrote, and again, in terms of processing that, I didn't tell anybody until I was 19. I told a dear friend of mine who's still a great friend, and then eventually my circle of friends became aware of it, and then after that, I actually turned to some professional sources and I processed it the way I really needed to. But my friends who are still my best friends. This group of guys were just wonderful. I mean, far beyond their time in the late '80s and
Mhm.
understanding something like that. But yes, part of the journey from that was to write. So my first book's called Copperhead Road, and it is actually it's not really it's a psychological thriller. I was not yet a prosecutor when I wrote that book. I polished it later in life, but that first book is a coming of age story. It's a man in his 40s looking back on his last year of high school, and there are autobiographical elements, but of course it's a much more dramatic story, and I'm very proud of it. I think it's a solid book. And then the next four are crime thrillers. They are traditional crime thrillers, mostly set in New York City, where I lived and worked for years and years. I was a prosecutor first in Alexandria, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C. and then I was in New York for the rest of my professional life, at least for the time that I was doing this. And those stories are informed by that. And I say in every book, they're informed by the survivors I work for, that I had just that I had the tremendous honor to work with and for, and also the men and women in the police department, in the defense bar, the judges. I mean, everyone around me was very colorful, and they all added to those stories and those characters. So it's a great joy. I absolutely get a kick out of writing, and I'll continue to do it. Whether I sell a million or whether some books do really well, some haven't done as well, doesn't matter. It comes out of me, and it's a great outlet.
That's so awesome. So anybody who wants to get your books, Roger Canaff, Canaff, can go to their local bookstore or Barnes and
Yeah.
Noble or Amazon and purchase.
Yeah, you could, but yeah, and rogercanaff.com. I was lucky to get that domain. ROGERCANAFF. All sorts of stuff on me there. And if you want to take a look at the list of books, and you can reach out to me there too. People do all the time. And I also provided a list of advocate services on there. So if someone is in crisis and ends up on my website, you'll find resources there. If you are, if you're in pain, or if one of my books triggers you, which is also a thing. Trigger warnings. I think it's great that those are associated with a lot of creative projects now. It's important to write about these things, but it's also important to warn people about the potential effects.
That's great. And we're going to put a link to your website resources on our resources page at Smarter Online Safety
Mm-hmm.
as well, because it is
Yeah,
so good.
terrific,
I've seen your list and it's wonderful. And thank you for keeping it current. That is so great,
terrific.
Roger. You've given and anything else that you do that you want to let people know about?
No, I think we've covered it. I mean, I'm still doing training and consulting, although yeah, I'm aging out. I think put it this way, I'm aging out in terms of the nuts and bolts of actually prosecuting these cases because the technology is moving so fast. But what
Mhm.
I will say is that the dynamics are the same, and they will
Mhm.
always be the same. The dynamics that are associated with why predators do what they do,
Mhm.
how they do what they do, and how they seek to infiltrate, that has not changed, and I don't think it's going to anytime soon. So, to the extent that I'm still relevant, I'm always going to be out there. I'm always going to be out there pitching and assisting people. And I salute you too, Jocelyn, for everything you're doing. I mean, just in the short time I've gotten to know you, I can't wait to read your book in January. Uh, and I'm terrified just because I know that there's such a potential for victimization out there for all of us in an increasingly complex world.
It's so true. It's so true. And thank you for what you're doing. And you and I share something too. We're both speakers, at events, helping educate
Mm-hmm.
people and all that. And you're a wonderful speaker. So if anybody's looking for a speaker
Thanks.
on predators and how they work and what you need to do to prevent and stuff, I highly recommend Roger as a speaker. So that's awesome. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
This has been chock full of information, scary and hopeful, and and very timely. And thank you for letting everybody know what they need to do so that they can stay safer and smarter online.
Yep. I hope so.
So
Thank
great.
you so
Thank you
much,
so
Jocelyn.
much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody. So this has been another episode. Wow, chock full of things. Make sure you're having those conversations. This is so important. Take Roger's advice and, learn from the people who have already been victims before you become one. Or if you are one, please take care so you can protect yourself again. And until next time, stay safe out there.